Friends, we have just a quick announcement. We have one speaker stuck in traffic, so we're going to begin about 5 minutes late. But please, you have a basic human right to coffee and pastries. So please grab your coffee and pastries, and we'll get underway at 9:35. Thank you. Programming. Yes, let me test the audio. And friends, when you're speaking, we're going to pass the mic. We will have better setups.
You know, I was trying to get her. His schedule is so hard, and so then it was like the Thanksgiving week we were closed, and so I got the email.
No, well, these are all locations. All right, so when you arrived at the station, you passed their office. Yep.
When you all speak, pass the mic, and it's this mic on this one. Yeah. And can you do a test?
Check, check. As you came into the Union Station, our office was on your left.
Check.
Is that one okay?
Very convenient for
Check.
which I have to do immediately.
Closer.
I think you're okay.
Does this work?
Yeah.
Soft. Yeah, why don't we just put it closer? Yeah.
Is this better?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Do you feel like I have to hold it? Or should we use this?
No, so that's so
That's our question.
friends from the media have their own individual mics.
Okay.
So, hi everyone. We will have a malt box for the next press conference. Just saying. So we're at 9:30. I think we're waiting for our last speaker, so we'll get underway at 9:35. Just sit tight.
He's I think he can join.
Okay. Yeah.
Just make sure. I know. In Miami was like men and women off to two different sides. It was like a Quaker wedding or Amish wedding.
before we get underway, hi everyone, I'm Nikki Warden from Human Rights Watch. Show of hands, who's in town for the World Cup draw? Holy cow. All right, this was a good strategy. Show of hands, who's going to the Giuliani White House World Cup Task Force right after this? Okay, a few people? All right, great. This is a much better show to be at, so thank you for coming today. Sound on this mic, how is it? Does it work for everyone? Yes? Okay. Greetings. I think we will get underway. Oh, great. Dynamite. Thank you. Catherine. Oh. Thank you. Well, why don't we put it on the coffee table? Thank you. We are getting underway. So, welcome to those of you in the room and also online. I'm Nikki Warden. I'm the Director of Global Initiatives at Human Rights Watch, which means that I cover sport and human rights worldwide. I'll be your moderator for the event today, and the topic is human rights and the 2026 FIFA World Cup. There's a lot of excitement about any World Cup, but the two most recent FIFA World Cups in Russia and Qatar were associated with grave human rights abuses, including thousands of preventable deaths of migrant workers. The U.S., Canada, and Mexico World Cup was supposed to be a game changer for human rights, the first World Cup ever with a human rights strategy. Today, we are going to hear whether those promises are being delivered. We have experts on human rights, press freedom, the rights of migrants and asylum seekers, athletes' rights, and workers' rights. We will also hear about new human rights risks and what are the responsibilities of the main players in the World Cup delivery: FIFA, the U.S. government, and the 16 host city committees. This week is a critical time to revisit this topic with new research and experts' perspectives. On Friday, Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president, and Donald Trump, the U.S. president, will participate in the World Cup draw at the Kennedy Center to determine which teams will play each other. FIFA has also announced its inaugural FIFA Peace Prize to be awarded on Friday. That prize has no transparent process, no nominees, no judges, and was, by the way, apparently news to the FIFA Council, which is the governing body of FIFA. A few housekeeping notes for our press conference today. I want to remind you that this session will be recorded for journalists who can't be with us at this time. If you have a question, please put it in, and you're on the Zoom link, please put it in the chat with your name and news organization, and I will work to direct all questions in and outside of the room to our experts. I do want to be clear that each of the groups speaking here today has its own mandate, and we partners are each speaking in our own independent capacity. Another note about the topic today. Human Rights Watch and our colleagues here, Amnesty International, the ACLU, RSF, and others, we regularly report on conditions in Canada and Mexico, as we have for decades. But the U.S. is hosting the vast majority of the games in 11 cities. That is a total of 78 out of 104 of these games. So think 78 Super Bowls in the United States, including the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and the final at MetLife Stadium. And the human rights and immigration landscape has changed markedly since January 2025. So due to the severity of recent U.S. legal and political developments, our analysis today is focusing on the United States as a principal host nation. In the coming months, we will also be reporting on human rights abuses in Canada and Mexico. So a short explanation first. In less than 200 days, the World Cup opens. It was supposed to be the largest and most inclusive sporting event in history, 48 nations, an estimated 6.5 million attendees, a lot of journalists. A truly global celebration, but increasingly it appears the world is not welcome, at least here in the United States. As only months remain until the kickoff on June 11, human rights trends are not going in the right direction. To illustrate this, Human Rights Watch is publishing new research today. It's a previously unreported case of an arrest, a family separation, and a deportation of a fan and a father at the Club World Cup final at MetLife Stadium in July. His father, who loves soccer, planned a special day with his children at a FIFA tournament. He used a small drone to try to take a family photo in the adjacent American Dream parking lot. Instead of enjoying the day watching football with his 10 and 14-year-old sons, the father, an asylum seeker, was arrested, turned over to ICE, held for 3 months in New Jersey's Delaney Hall detention facility, and then deported. A minor drone violation became a 3-month detention and then a deportation. The family separation happened because of a failure by FIFA to properly assess the risks for fans and families and to mitigate those risks. This is not an isolated case. From January 20 to October 15 of this year, ICE arrested at least 92,392 people in and around cities where the World Cup games will be played, according to government data that's been newly analyzed by Human Rights Watch. This reporting is now live, and we have copies of it on the coffee table over there. So I'm now turning to our partners in the Sport and Rights Alliance and Dignity 2026. Although trends are not going in the right direction, the good news is that there are coalitions, experts documenting these abuses and pressing FIFA and the 16 host city committees to uphold their own and international human rights policies, to follow the rule of law, to follow international human rights. So first we are going to hear from Rachel Causey of the Sport and Rights Alliance, and we also have one of the leaders of Dignity 2026. So there are two large alliances representing a total of 26 different groups with us today, and this is the coalition that is standing up to the power of FIFA and the power of football to cover up serious human rights abuses. So with that, I'll turn over to Rachel Causey, Communications Coordinator for the Sport and Rights Alliance.
Yes, thank you so much, Miki, and thank you all for joining in person and online. My name is Rachel Causey. I'm the Communications Coordinator, as Miki said, for the Sport and Rights Alliance. A special thank you to Human Rights Watch for hosting. Closer. Human Rights Watch, one of our founding members. Thank you so much. If you don't know, the Sport and Rights Alliance is a coalition of leading civil society organizations and trade unions, including HRW, Amnesty International, Reporters Without Borders, the ITUC, World Players Association, and more. We represent and engage with athletes, workers, fans, journalists, and local communities, especially those most impacted by the human rights risks of sport, such as women, children, LGBTI people, people of color, survivors of abuse. We conduct research, advocacy, and campaigns to ensure that the rights and well-being of those most impacted by sport are respected and protected. The SRA was founded 10 years ago, actually, in between the back-to-back mega sporting events of the 2014 Brazil World Cup and the 2016 Rio Olympics. I know some of you here today might have been at our very first press conference held with Amnesty International at Rio de Janeiro. And so as you know, as Miki said, we're now facing a very similar situation here in the United States with the Men's World Cup in just 6 months and then the LA Olympics 2 years after that. As a founding member of the Dignity 2026 coalition over the last 6 years, with our partners and with everyone here at the table, we have been working to raise the bar for human rights, not only for these 3 host countries, the US, Mexico, and Canada, but for all countries who are planning to stage this event in the future. In fact, this World Cup is the very first to have human rights in the bidding criteria from the very beginning, in the bidding criteria, the requirements for all host country candidates. This, plus the addition of human rights into the Article 3 of the FIFA statutes, was a huge achievement for our movement and a moment of real hope. But now, with the devolving situation of human rights in the United States, this has put those commitments and advances at risk. So we're calling on FIFA and the host committees to reaffirm their commitments to human rights and take concrete action to ensure that this tournament does not contribute to or exacerbate harm for the people and communities involved. Please enjoy the rest of the press briefing and let us know if you have any additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And everyone should sign up for the Sport and Rights Alliance media list to make sure you see our coverage from all over the world. And now we turn to Jennifer Lee, who is the coordinator from Dignity 2026, and she is also the director of the Community Health and Innovation Program at Georgetown Law School. And Jennifer has been present from the creation of the Dignity 2026 and back in 2018 when there were the bidding process that included human rights for the first time. That was really the beginning of Dignity 2026. We were the stakeholders consulted. So Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you, Minky. Good morning. My name is Jennifer Lee, as Minky has already mentioned. I am director of the Center for Community Health Innovation at Georgetown Law School here in Washington, D.C. I also lead the Dignity 2026 Coalition, which is currently comprised of 16 civil society stakeholders here in the United States, including many members represented here today, NAACP, ACLU, SRA, Human Rights Watch, and many others who are unable to join us today. As Minky mentioned, we have been working together in close coordination since as early as 2018, when the United States, Mexico, and Canada submitted a bid to host the game next year. And our work includes, a part of our work includes working in close coordination with FWC 2026. In fact, much of our collaboration and consultations with the FIFA 2026 team in Miami has been highly constructive over the course of the past few years. That includes our providing significant input on the human rights framework that FIFA has shared with host cities that outlines expectations for host cities in terms of how they engage on issues like safety and inclusion, workers' rights, and access to remedies and grievance mechanisms. Our hope, of course, is that these principles will be substantively and meaningfully reflected in the host cities' action plans, which we expect to see in the early part of next year. And of course, we are very much hoping and encouraging host city committees to make sure that the stakeholders, the grassroots organizations in their cities who are boots on the ground on these issues, are able to meaningfully consult and view those action plans well before then. In addition to our sometimes very frank exchanges with FIFA, we are also working to mobilize grassroots stakeholders within cities and across all 16 host cities, and particularly those 11 here in the United States. And I want to say that finally, it's important to note that in addition to the host city committees and our expectations for them, we want to make sure that FIFA itself is held accountable to their own business and human rights practices, certainly in line with the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights, which includes preventing and mitigating any harms that FIFA itself may contribute to or that are acted upon by government entities. So as Miki mentioned, we are 200 days or about 7 months out from the start of the tournament, and I think for many of us this is an unprecedented moment. You see before you today some of the most prominent civil liberties and civil rights organizations here in the United States coming together to express some of our concerns and also indeed expectations for next year. You'll hear from us many different issues, including, for example, I think for many of us, immigration is top of mind. Over the summer, some members of our coalition worked closely with Fair Square to publish and organize a public sign-on letter directed to President Infantino, expressing our concerns about this administration's current policies around immigration and the impact that it will have on communities, workers, fans, visitors, and the people who already live here. To date, that letter has not been publicly acknowledged or responded to by FIFA, even though it's signed by over 90 civil society organizations here in the United States. Another issue, of course, is the impact of the tournament on some of our most vulnerable community members, including people who are experiencing homelessness or are housing insecure, people who face risks of being displaced by the tournament or even criminalized for their status as part of so-called beautification efforts or cleaning up efforts by the host cities. This is especially important to us in the wake of last year's Supreme Court decision in Grants Pass versus Johnson, which essentially held that it was constitutional for cities to criminalize sleeping outdoors in our communities. You will also hear shortly from Kathy Feingold, who is the international director at the AFL-CIO, which has been a founding partner in our coalition and has been an anchor on our labor rights issues across the past few years. We know that workers, of course, are the backbone to the tournament, and they will be also vulnerable to unsafe working conditions like heat stress or low wages and other types of issues. And then we've seen how some of these issues, including displacement, overpolicing, and so forth, has expressed itself in many ways in past tournaments here in the United States, including the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, 1984 Olympics in LA, which are host cities for next year. And for us, they serve as cautionary tales about how not to proceed. So the next year, for many of us, it will be a real test of FIFA's actions and commitments to human rights, as well as those of host cities. I think one thing that we can agree on with FIFA very clearly is that the unprecedented scale of the tournament, which is 104 Super Bowl-sized matches or Taylor Swift concerts, pick your poison, it's unprecedented for many of us. And the bottom line is that in addition to making sure that FIFA is held accountable, I think the message today, too, is that FIFA's reputation in human rights is, of course, well documented, but FIFA cannot be used as a shield by host cities and governments in the United States or Canada and Mexico to hide behind human rights abuses. In many ways, of course, 2026 is also unique because of the fact that the responsibilities for the operations of the tournament and the human rights protections are diffuse across many different stakeholders, including FIFA, but also host cities, host city committees, and various aspects of government. So every entity has a role to play, including all of us in this room as civil society stakeholders, as press, and as stakeholders broadly. But happily, I think the United States has a rich history of civil society organizations being movement builders and agitators, as Jamal likes to frequently say, to make sure that that human rights conditions are protected. So with that, are we ready to introduce the video? I want to introduce Kathy Feingold, who of course is the International Director at the AFL-CIO and is Deputy President of the International Trade Union Confederation, or ITUC. Kathy is joining us by video today in pre-recorded remarks. She's currently on work travel, and we're ready to set it up. We'll turn it to Kathy.
AFL-CIO, the Union Federation representing 15 million workers in the United States. I'm also the Deputy President of the International Trade Union Confederation, a global union body representing over 200 million workers around the world. Working people care that FIFA will uphold strong worker rights protections. We want the games to be successful in the United States. Without working people, the games can't go on. It's going to be workers that are selling things at the stadiums. They're going to be building things to make sure that we can have fan festivals, setting up the porta potties, making sure that there is security there. Working people are going to get the job done. That's why we think it's so important that the FIFA Games include a robust framework that upholds human and worker rights protections. This is critical because we've seen how games have been played in other countries around the world. And we know that often working people communities don't benefit from these games. That's why the AFL-CIO is a proud founding member of the Dignity 26 Coalition. It's a coalition that brings together unions, civil society organizations, LGBTQI, human rights groups. Together, we know we can make these games successful. But it's going to be incredibly important that FIFA commits to making sure that not only the local host committees uphold the human and worker rights framework that was built and included in the bid documents, but also that FIFA and all of its contract relations make sure that worker rights and human rights is front and center. We're looking forward to this game. Working people not only want to be spectators, they want to enjoy what's going to happen in their cities. But it's going to be critical that we make sure that these games, whether it happens in the United States, Mexico, or Canada, are done with strong worker and human rights protections.
So, thanks very much, everyone. I got a message that it's hard to hear the video online, so we will make Kathy Feingold's video available afterwards. And so now we are turning to the great Jamal Watkins, Can we bring the room lights up? And move the mic.
Good morning, everyone.
Yes. Well, I'm going to say,
Yeah.
I'm going to do your title. Jamal is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Advancement for the NAACP, which is one of the bedrock groups that is part of Dignity 2026. Jamal.
Thank you, Mickey. Good morning, everyone. Jamal Watkins with the NAACP. I bring you greetings on behalf of America's largest and oldest civil rights organization. The NAACP is a 116-year-old institution that is embedded in more than 2,600 communities here in the United States. And actually, as an NGO working with the United Nations, we have members and activists in countries around the world, including Japan, Korea, Brazil, etc. Now, we are here today, in part, as you've heard from my colleagues and others, in regards to the World Cup being and coming to North America, which is exciting. But we also know that the backdrop of this great sporting event impacts and includes people and communities. And here in the U.S., we've had an unfortunate sort of reality, I would say, over the past year, where the politicalization of immigrant communities and the targeting of immigrant communities has been in the negative. And what we find in many ways as we started this journey back even in 2018 was that our focus is putting people above profits. We know that fans, businesses, communities, working people, everyone benefits when sporting events come into communities and thrive, but we also know that there are some negative externalities that we have to face. And so the first concern that we have is this notion of immigrant communities being targeted and demonized by the current political administration. You can literally turn on any news station here in the U.S. and see that there is a hyper fear, if you will, in terms of ICE raids and folks being targeted by the current administration. And so what does that look like when you have a sporting event where millions of guests from around the globe descend upon this country, the United States, with the backdrop of xenophobia and a negative targeting of immigrant communities? The second reality that we are always tracking is that when these types of sporting events come into communities, we know that other sort of illicit and illegal activities skyrocket. Think the trafficking of women, children, people of color. Human trafficking becomes, for example, an issue. And so if we're not prepared to sort of stand in the gap and say, yes, the sporting event is great. Yes, we want to celebrate and have a great time, but we also want to make sure that communities are not negatively impacted. It goes back to that premise of putting people above profits. And finally, what we would argue is that given the amount of revenue and all of the eyeballs that will be on North America, and in particular the United States, we want to make sure that FIFA and every city and every community and the U.S. government toes the line that we're not just investing in the sporting event itself, where we're investing in the communities being safe, free from crime and violence, folks being free from targeting, folks being able to express themselves freely, freedom of the press in order to articulate and tell the right stories, and really to connect the dots so that when the World Cup leaves these great shores and goes to other countries, that the standards have been raised and that the bar is high for both human rights and civil rights. And that's the fight that we're in right now. And I use the term fight because in many ways it's felt like a push and pull when all we're saying is put people first, put people above profits, and make sure that the sport, the fans, the players, the businesses are all thriving in the right ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal. And FIFA is very, very well known for putting people above profits. So, so two things. We are going to turn to a video message from Matthew Patafisi, who is a former men's professional player and an Athlete Ally ambassador. Athlete Ally is a core member of Dignity 2026 and also of the Sport and Rights Alliance. It works to stop LGBT harassment and abuse in sports, starting at grade school through professional sports. So we're going to tee up that video, and while we're doing that, I wanted to ask people in the room and also online if you can formulate and start sending your questions. We will turn very soon to the question period. So the room lights.
their dreams are conditional. And of course, that's not an experience that we want. And this extends beyond just young fans as well. Obviously, FIFA is a global workplace. In addition to players like myself, you have the fans who spend their time and money. You've got referees, medical staff, media teams. And ultimately, when basic human rights are not protected, all of these stakeholders are going to be looking over their shoulders. And you can't expect them to perform their best or even participate fully when that's the case. Ultimately, the organizations running these events, mainly FIFA, have a moral and professional obligation to protect their workforce and the fans. That's why I'm a strong proponent of reinstating the strong anti-discriminatory policy that was put in place earlier this year. Policy needs to be clear and actionable to protect all of those stakeholders attending and or participating in this event in any capacity.
So thank you all. We know the audio on that may have been hard to hear, so we can make that video available to you. And to say, Matthew Pachafici's video also, his message is that the anti-discrimination and anti-racism policies that FIFA rolled back, they rolled back their own policies earlier this year ahead of the Club World Cup, that those policies need to be reinstated. Some of you will know there were homophobic chants in the Atlanta stadium after those policies were rolled back by FIFA. So that's an important action item. So now we turn to another core member of Dignity 2026. Daniel Noronha is the America's Advocacy Director for Amnesty International USA, based here in Washington, D.C.
And I've heard that it's much better with the mic very close.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Minky. Almost to the face. Thank you so much, Minky. Good morning, everyone. Buenos días. Thank you very much for having me here on behalf of Amnesty International. As you might know, Amnesty International is one of the oldest human rights organizations in the world. We are an organization, member-based organization with at least 10 million members all over the world, that we fight to protect and promote human rights in the world. The organization is taking note of the current climate of intimidation and harassment that has been facing the protection of human rights in the United States in general. The federal government actions and excessive use of force have demonstrated a chilling effect on dissent that have led to the criminalization of protest. Additionally, the near dismantling of all human rights capacities within U.S. foreign policy, funding, and structure has deeply reduced the capability of international institutions for more accountability. This basically means that all the international institutions that at some point could perform some oversight capacities have been diminished. Within this context, the ability to peacefully protest without fear of retribution is a cornerstone of a free society. Yet, this is increasingly under pressure in the United States. There is a long history of peaceful protest in global football, connected as well with people power. This is the most popular sport in the world, therefore people must be at the center of it. FIFA and the United States authorities must ensure that the World Cup does not become a pretext for stifling dissent or expanding mass surveillance. Every player, fan, journalist, and resident has the right to participate and protest without fear of sanction, arbitrary detention, or any sort of discriminatory treatment, and in this case also of deportation. FIFA has repeatedly committed to delivering a tournament that respects and protects basic freedoms, including rights respecting law enforcement. We need to make sure that the US put these safeguards up front. For those reasons, we as Amnesty International also reject any increase in the militarization of public security in the United States in this context. These include any form of immigration enforcement in complete disregard of human rights. Families, fans, players, and other members of the football community have the right to enjoy the game without the fear of being detained and separated from their loved ones. This is a worrisome expansion of authoritarian practices intended to stoke racism, which in turn instills the fear in many communities and basically is aimed to silence dissent. When people gather for the games, they should not be subjected to the use of technological tools with automated capabilities that enable constant mass monitoring, surveillance, and assessment of people, often for the purpose of targeting non-U.S. citizens for the purpose of immigration enforcement. The World Cup should be a space that embraces diversity, freedom, and equality, where it is a safe space that celebrates football and the other multiculturalism that it brings with it. Football is not only a sports arena, but also the people's tribune. It is essentially an anti-authoritarian game. As the former Brazilian football legend Socrates once said, if people do not have the power to say things, then players will say it for them. He also stated, while I was a footballer, my legs amplified my voice. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Daniel, and also for bringing Socrates' voice into the room. So I'm a core part of the Sport and Rights Alliance is a group called Football Supporters Europe. Many of you will be familiar with them. They were not able to be here with us today. And also the ISC, which is the International Supporters Coalition, which is a North American fans group very similar to FSC. And they have been part of the Dignity Alliance since 2018, going back to the human rights risk assessments. I wanted to read a message from Bailey Brown, who is the president of the ISC and was not able to be here with us today. And her comment is about supporters' voice and fan safety. We also have an omnibus statement from many of the groups with quotes that you can use. And Bailey says, supporters are the backbone of this sport, yet FIFA keeps making decisions about our safety without ever talking to the people who actually show up. So the fans are in the stadiums. She says, you cannot claim to unite the world while shutting out the very fans who bring the energy and passion to every match. We are asking for something simple: transparency, real consultation, and concrete protections for every supporter at the 2026 World Cup. So I wanted to turn now to the topic of press freedom. It's relevant for all of you in the room. And of course, it is the freedom that protects all others. I wanted to also say that the committee, we have our speaker from RSF. I also wanted to say that the Committee to Protect Journalists is a core member of the Sport and Rights Alliance from the beginning. And CPJ has provided safety and security training to more than 700 journalists in the United States this year. And they also have a very important WhatsApp chatbot that you can text if you are having problems. It's almost like a crisis helpline, and the need for that is going up in the United States. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Clayton Weimers, who is the Executive Director of Reporters Without Borders, based here in the United States. So this is the U.S. arm of RSF. Clayton.
Yes, thank you. I'm Clayton Weimers. Reporters Without Borders is a global press freedom organization. We have offices in 15 countries around the world. We have a network of correspondents in 150 other countries. We really do make an effort to be everywhere, and obviously the connection here is that FIFA is everywhere. The World Cup is everywhere. Soccer is everywhere. It is one of the things that really brings everybody together. And we know for a fact that the whole world, billions of people, is going to be tuning in to watch this tournament. But not just watch this tournament, but follow along. And the story of any World Cup is not limited to the 90 minutes that occur on a pitch. It's in and out of the stadiums. It's the run-up to the tournament. It's the construction of infrastructure. It's the fan celebrations and the travel from all around the world to converge on this one point and celebrate something that we're all very passionate about. And people all around the world who are not able to come are going to rely on journalists to tell a complete and contextualized story of this tournament before, during, and after the games are being played. And so we have to ask ourselves, what kind of story are they going to hear or read or watch? We have to ensure that the story is freely told, that journalists have access, that journalists are safe, and that journalists are left alone to do their jobs. we can't take that for granted, unfortunately. This tournament is happening against the backdrop of a broader crackdown against press rights in this country. And you can go to rsf.org and see almost daily updates on different examples of how that's happening concretely. But I'll just cite one example right now, which is going to be very relevant to the journalists in this room, as well as many of the journalists who are going to be covering this tournament, which is a proposed change to the terms of visas that are given to international journalists to legally live and work in the United States. We presently have a very generous system that is very open and welcoming of journalists all around the world to tell America's story to their countries. But the proposed crackdown is going to severely restrict the terms of these visas. It will lead to deportations. It will lead to media organizations deciding it's not worth it to send a journalist in the first place. It will result in the rest of the world having less access to reliable information about the United States at a time when the whole world is very concerned with what's happening in this country. And, I'll just finish by saying very quickly, I think too often people make assumptions about sports journalism as not being necessarily full and complete journalism, or that sports journalists aren't necessarily faced with the same threats that other types of journalists, like, say, a war correspondent might be faced with. That's just false. And you don't have to look any farther than what's happening right now at this very moment in Algeria. If you see me glancing down at my phone, it's because I'm checking for updates, because soccer reporter Christophe Glaze is in court right now having his appeal hearing for a 7-year sentence for terrorism-related charges. But let's be very clear. Christophe is being charged with an act of journalism. He's being punished for doing his job as a journalist, and it's outrageous that he's been detained in Algeria since May of last year. He should be released immediately. I bring up Christophe's case not because he's special. Unfortunately, he's not. He's one of over 500 journalists currently being detained all around the world. And so I bring this up because I don't want there to be any misconceptions. Soccer journalists are journalists. Sports journalists are journalists. And journalists are under threat all around the world, including here in the United States.
Thanks very much. And I would add that even here in this room are journalists who have experienced repression in the context of the World Cup. So these are real risks, and they are real risks that FIFA has failed to mitigate in the past, even though they knew about the risk. Now, batting cleanup for our discussion today is Jamil Dakwar. He is the anchor of our conversation and also the head of the U.S. program at the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union.
Thank you very much, Minky. Thank you for being here this morning. My name is Jamil Dakwar. I'm the director of the ACLU Human Rights Program. While FIFA and host cities prepare for the games, the Trump administration is escalating dangerous policies that put immigrant communities, foreign visitors, and residents at risk. Attacks on immigrants and those visiting the United States are at an all-time high. ICE is conducting raids across the country, tearing families apart, deporting thousands without due process, and holding an unprecedented number in inhumane detention facilities, including children. And the host cities of the upcoming World Cup are among the most heavily impacted, with cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, and Dallas facing already extreme surveillance and ICE activity. The Trump administration actions threaten our neighbors and tourists alike. And FIFA has unique leverage to push for change, not to whitewash and capitulate. This is why more than 90 civil society organizations, including labor groups, as Jennifer mentioned, including the ACLU, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and NAACP, have already sent a letter urging FIFA to act. But sadly, we have not yet to see meaningful assurances. On the contrary, we are only seeing further escalation from the administration with deployment of the National Guard, especially in host cities like LA and Chicago. This tournament should be about celebrating unity and our connection to the world. And without action today, FIFA risks becoming a stage for authoritarianism. The Trump administration executive order banning visitors from 12 countries, including from 2 countries that qualified for the games, I believe Haiti and Iran, combined with the ongoing ICE raids in many of the cities that will host matches, poses a serious threat to the safety and dignity of millions of people. These policies put communities at risk and threaten to undermine the integrity of the tournament itself. People of all nationalities should be able to travel to the United States without fear of being denied entry, detained, or deported without due process. And people with the United States should be able to exercise their right to freedom of expression without fear of arbitrary detention and deportation. Similarly, immigrant communities should not live in perpetual fear of being ripped apart from their communities, as we just heard from Minky about this very troubling case that happened last year. FIFA has repeatedly promised that the world is welcome in America, in the United States. But without clear, forceful advocacy and action from FIFA, those words ring hollow. FIFA must use its influence to call on the US government to uphold human rights, end discriminatory travel bans, and stop immigration enforcement actions that target communities where matches will take place in particular. The longer FIFA stays silent or doesn't do enough, the greater the risk that their brand and event will become part of a public relations tool to normalize an increasingly authoritarian U.S. government. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think you've heard today from all of these experts, and we also, as I mentioned, have a statement. So we have several materials that I'm going to encourage you to take today. But this is really a collective message. I think that FIFA has no World Cup without players, fans, workers, host communities, and you, the journalists. And it really is an opportunity to show as well that these mega sporting events can be delivered without serious human rights abuses, that they should be delivered without an ICE dragnet to separate children from parents, and that we actually shouldn't even be having to have this press conference. So with that, I'm going to turn over to questions. We're actually going to go first to questions we are going to go first to questions online. So I'm going to take the first question, actually from Paul McGinnis from The Guardian. What are the specific actions you would want FIFA or host cities to take to protect the safety of immigrant communities and traveling fans? Paul would also like to know the immigration status at the time of arrest of the father in today's Human Rights Watch report. So I'm going to answer the second part first. The immigration status was asylum seeker. As you may know, asylum seekers, once you arrive in the United States, you have a right to seek asylum. You have a right to go before the judge and make a case. The father was an asylum seeker, and like many in the United States whose asylum status has been arbitrarily changed from legal to illegal, that is his situation. I would say this is, I must mention that Haiti, the men's team, has qualified for the World Cup for the first time in 50 years. There are hundreds of thousands of Haitians in the United States who have been here legally under a program called TPS, Temporary Protective Status. As of last month, they have now been made illegal. So this is a status change for hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people. And that is, this shows the hazards of a World Cup in a place that is actively making people who were previously legal. The father had a work permit, had a social security number, and was an asylum seeker, did not have a chance to make his case to the judge. So I wanted to go now for, Daniel, would you take the first part of the question? What are the specific actions you would want from FIFA to protect the safety of immigrant communities and traveling fans? And then I'll go to Jamil.
Sure, thank you. I will say that from FIFA, what we will need, as I said before, is that they need to get those commitments and those safeguards from the U.S. government. FIFA as a whole is an organization that does have the chance, for its volume, for its capacity, for its reach, to provide certain mechanisms and protections. But who is the real responsible here in this case specific is the United States, the government itself. The state has to provide the safeguards that none of these actions will be taking place, that no discriminatory policies will be implemented, and no types of immigration raids will take place in this context that will just hurt the game and will hurt the communities participating in it.
So I'm going to go to Jill and then to Jennifer.
Great. So on the question of what we expect of host cities, look, host cities in the United States have legal obligations, constitutional obligations, and human rights obligations. Before even talking about FIFA and the sport movement, that is something that they have to abide by the law, refrain from discrimination, racial profiling, targeting people because who they are, and engaging in those any kind of unlawful activities. But of course, with this hosting these events, they have to have additional safeguards for rights protection, including for labor, for workers, for immigrant communities, for free speech and assembly rights, for all these events that are going to happen, so that people can participate freely without the fear of being detained, summarily deported, etc. One of the things that we're concerned about is some cities have reached agreements with the federal government called 287G program. These agreements have been essentially deputizing to the local state governments the federal authority to engage in local enforcement of immigration, particularly with relation to detention of people who will be detained. Those agreements have been harmful, have been abusive, have been well documented by our organizations as something that should not be made. So we are calling on host cities to refrain from these kinds of agreements, because these are something that open the door for more abuses and less transparency and accountability, and less people will be willing to be in those places if they will not be protected from abuse.
Thank you. And our new Human Rights Watch reporting also has a section on the 287G. Jennifer.
Yeah, and I think it's also incumbent for us to mention the fact that in addition to hearing from national stakeholders on these immigration issues, this is also clearly a very localized issue in many of the host city committees, and there's lots of local immigration advocacy organizations who have been kind of beating this drum for many, many years, and of course are very under-resourced at this moment. But I do want to kind of mention, in addition to the 287G agreements that Jamil has mentioned, and the fact that, I think a lot of stakeholders and cities are asking for repeals of those agreements, or at the very least making sure that law enforcement are trained adequately. I do want to say that, within this 100-mile border zone that we have in this country, where that allows for the kind of warrantless searches and arrests of individuals, I think we should note that 8 out of those 11 host cities here in the United States are within that 100-mile border zone. So I think that's one of the reasons why this is front of mind for many of our cities. I also want to mention that I think many of our cities' stakeholders are asking for open and transparent communication and information and data, including data tracking around the arrests and where they're being held, and just making sure that that information is made publicly in advance for all stakeholders.
Thanks very much. So we're going to go now with a question from Khalid Nahar from the German media Sportschau. It asks a question. I'm going to have Jamal take that question. The question is, political neutrality is within FIFA's statutes. FIFA also claims to have a zero-tolerance approach when it comes to discrimination. How does this match up with the close relationship of the presidents of FIFA and the USA that has been shaping up in recent months? So a question about discrimination and anti-racism policies.
Well, we want to be clear that there is no such thing as political neutrality in these current times. Most folks would argue that's like saying let's be colorblind, when we know that you actually have to be politically conscious of what's happening in the context in the U.S. in order to make sure that the policies and practices that you're adhering to actually match up with your values. And I'm using that because I don't want this to turn into all of our organizations are somehow anti-Trump. But what we are anti are the immigration enforcement policies that are literally tearing apart families and demonizing immigrant communities. You heard Minky lift up the reality that temporary protected status for Haitian community members here in the United States has been wiped away. For what reason? It's hyper-political, it's partisan, and it's meant to be used as a tool of fear. And so we're clear that in this moment, with FIFA coming into North America, the United States in particular, $14 billion plus of revenue, if the funding giant that FIFA is not using that to make sure that the values of embracing communities, making sure that policies and practices are embedded in due process. If those things are not being pushed to the forefront, then it does become very political. Then you actually are aligning with policies that are flawed and wrong, not only for communities here in the United States, but for the hundreds of thousands and millions of fans around the globe who are looking to the United States as a beacon for what should be democracy. And so in many ways, what we're wrestling with is not semantics, but it's real. And so part of the discussion that we've had even before this press conference, some folks would say, what's the chances of a family being torn apart and folks being detained in an extrajudicial process and disappearing? Very high. You see it on the news almost every day. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's happening in our communities. And so if FIFA turns a blind eye to this, then they actually are picking a political side. And it's the wrong political side connected to the values and morals that we as a nation actually stand for.
Thank you. And obviously the World Cup is an attractive event. So it is it's an event that people love and are attracted to, and they may not recognize the dangers that are inherent, and it's FIFA's responsibility. I have a question from Sander van Meersbergen from Dutch media Algemeen Dagblad. And the question is about fan safety. Suppose I'm a Dutch fan wanting to visit the World Cup. What is your advice? Should I delete messages about Donald Trump on my phone? Are there other things I must keep in mind? I'm going to bring this question to a couple of our experts. I wanted actually to start with Clayton because many journalists will be, I think we should recognize that one of the sub-themes today is the World Cup is a workplace. Matthew, the former MLS player, mentioned this. It's a workplace for players. It's a workplace for fans groups. It is a workplace for journalists. So what are the risks to people if you have messages on your phone? And please also cover social media risks.
Yes, thank you. This is actually an excellent opportunity for me to plug our new safety resource website that just relaunched on rsf.org, which contains all kinds of helpful guides for safely doing journalism all over the world, including here in the United States, including digital hygiene and digital safety tips. So I would encourage any journalists who are here or tuning in who travel across borders regularly to check that out. You may already know a lot of it, but it's never a bad idea to refresh what you know. It is an unfortunate reality that we know that border agents are checking social media accounts of folks who are entering this country. And they don't care if you're a journalist. They don't care if you're an academic. They don't care if you're just a random tourist coming in. And the reality is they have a lot of latitude to deny entry to anyone trying to enter the country. There are these sort of gray areas at the border where, you don't necessarily have access to all of the legal resources you might ordinarily have on U.S. soil. And I'm not a lawyer. I can't give you legal advice. And I'm not going to be one to tell you to delete social media or to get rid of or to scrub your presence online. But you do have to be very careful about these things because we know for a fact that they are looking for anything that might be considered suspicious. And what might be considered suspicious is very much up to the whims of an individual agent, and it's very hard to predict what could trigger a search. In all likelihood, it's not going to happen to you, but everyone thinks it's not going to happen to them until it does happen to them. And it is a major concern of ours that we're going to see journalists turned away at the border for something as innocuous as a tweet that the Trump administration doesn't like. Not even necessarily a critical tweet, but just one that covers the administration honestly and fairly.
Sure. As I mentioned in my remarks, one of the things that Amnesty has been following is the mass surveillance procedures and technologies that have been used by the federal government. Basically, that what we're concerned is that CBP, the Custom and Border Protection Agency, as well as the United States Citizen and Immigration Services, they have been using different technologies to do mass surveillance of different social media profiles of individuals, of organizations, especially trying to tackle visa granting and to tackle non-U.S. citizens for immigration purposes. We have established in different organizations, many of us here present, when we travel between borders, we have like different protocols that we adhere to. Our recommendations to partners also who have been traveling here is to adhere to similar protocols to kind of protect themselves in the border, because once you get to these ports of entry, some of the legal protections change. They're not the same, and not everyone will be facing with the same type of agent at the border. As my colleague here said, you could be at the whims of a CBP agent that woke up sad, that woke up angry. Perhaps he didn't want Haiti to participate in the World Cup. You never know. And suddenly he will just deny you entry. Those are some of the things that we have been following. And in all of this, a key piece that I think is important to mention is that who needs to act in the U.S. institutionality to make sure that this doesn't exacerbate more is the U.S. Congress. The U.S. Congress needs to exercise their oversight capacities to actually do to call on the federal authorities and make sure that they adhere to federal law and international law as well.
Thanks very much. So we do have some more questions online, but I want to make sure we get to questions in the room. So any questions in the room? And we're just going to go left to right. So yes, and name and organization.
Yeah, Henry Whitnell from The Athletic. Mickey, you opened up like placing this in the context of the last two in Russia and Qatar. Does this feel similar at all? Not in the specific concerns necessarily, but the way that FIFA is interacting with those concerns and interacting with the government that is, the national government that is in charge.
So I'll take that question, but whenever I get a question about this, I have a flashback to a Sport and Rights Alliance meeting at FIFA headquarters in Zurich back in 2016. Gianni Infantino had just taken office after the thermonuclear event of half of the FIFA Council being arrested for corruption, Sepp Blatter and other senior leaders being removed from office. And at that time, Gianni Infantino passed over the table the set of human rights requirements and essentially said, we're not going to be able to do much about Russia or Qatar, but we are committed to uphold human rights and the framework, the UN guiding principles, the boring but important bedrock that all companies, and FIFA is a company, not a nonprofit, that FIFA adheres to. So I think after the human rights catastrophes of the Russia World Cup, the Qatar World Cup, serious abuses in Brazil, extrajudicial killings and other things, I think there was the idea that there would be a change. And we are here to tell you today that idea, that concept that there would be a meaningful human rights framework, it is not working. We are within months of the opening of the World Cup, and there is a lot of work to do. It is not too late, but it is absolutely time for FIFA to uphold the commitments it has voluntarily taken to put in place and implement the human rights framework. It is also the responsibility of the host city committees. We've got a lot in the room, so I'm going to go quickly and then we'll divide. Yes?
Mickey, do you think that the closeness of the relationship between the two presidents, Infantino and Trump, is a barrier to getting the kind of reform that you think needed? Is it too close, effectively, or do you think that should actually make it easier to elicit some of the changes that you're calling for?
So I'll go to our experts, and I think every organization is going to have a different answer. The question goes back to systems, right? It shouldn't be about personalities. Human rights, the rule of law, are systems. So there can't be one system for the U.S. and a different system for Canada and Mexico. And that actually was the goal of having a unified human rights strategy. I recommend you all go back and read the United Bid Human Rights Strategy. It was not one system. It was not just the United States World Cup. So I think it's really important to go back to the need for systems. I wanted to go to Jennifer for that question and then to Jamal. Yes.
It's an easy question. I mean, I will just give you one data point, which is in the previous administration, we had worked very closely with them, with members of USG, of U.S. government, in addition to working with FIFA and stakeholders and civil society representatives on the ground. And so that looks like very close conversations and monthly briefings with the State Department, DRL, which is the Bureau of Democracy and Labor and Human Rights within the State Department. We also worked quite closely with the White House, the National Economic Council, and the National Security Council, which have been tasked with overseeing the events. And so I offer that as a data point. I think for obvious reasons, our relationship with the White House has changed since January, but we hope for constructive conversations moving forward.
Jennifer's very diplomatic. Yes.
You've outlined over like the last hour dozens and concerns about what's going to happen in the United States, making condemnations or demands, asking for things. But you're asking for things from an organisation who thinks about it for a Peace Prize, is the president of this country, has said that he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize, that's going to play his favourite song during the World Cup draw on Friday. I'm just curious as to where you're getting confidence or hope that anyone at FIFA is actually engaging with this, or are we just talking to ourselves?
So thanks. I'm going to go to Jamal for that answer.
Well, I'll lead in and say two things. The first, and I think the question from the gentleman from BBC, the relationship is too close for comfort. Because what we're finding is that when Infantino aligns with a Donald Trump, then you literally are sending a signal not only to the United States, but to the world that all of the practices and policies that are coming out of this administration are okay or justified. And that is literally the antithesis of the agenda of an organization like the NAACP. I have a flashback to when we met with Infantino just down the street about a year ago. He sort of jokingly laughed off that the U.S. has problems when it comes to race and economic issues with working people. Yes. And that has been exacerbated by this current administration. So to your question about giving this president, if you will, a prize that says that he is somehow the ambassador of peace and is worthy and noble in some way in terms of embracing communities is actually laughable. And so I won't be diplomatic and say that the notion of having hope and the notion of fighting forward is what we have to do, not for FIFA or for the President of the United States, but for the communities we serve. My organization was founded basically when extrajudicial killings were happening in the United States, and I'm talking about lynchings at a high level, and folks were turning a blind eye, and the Globe was saying it's not a problem. So we have faced dark times before, and we understand that if we don't do things like this, but also connect the dots and lift up the stories through the real news, then we're not going to have the breakthroughs we need to make sure that these policies shift. And no offense, but these people are no longer in power.
I would agree with. I would just want to add another element to that. We're not talking about just people having good relationships. So the problem that we're seeing here is that is defiance of the rule of law, a defying of federal law and the Constitution in many of the actions that we're talking about. So in addition to the business and human rights framework that FIFA has committed to adopting and implementing, we're talking about a country and not just the one person that can be above the law or any administration. It has to be consistent with the rule of law. That's why we're thinking, what you say, what's the hope? The hope is that people in the United States, people around the world, can say that they can also express their views on what was going to happen. And they're already doing that through protests, through voting, through other means. And we think that those kinds of things will continue if this is going to escalate. This is not going to be a World Cup that will be leaving a good legacy if those things continue. This abusive immigration enforcement, crackdown on free speech, and the speaker that just asked earlier, the reporter, about whether it can be safely come to the United States, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. That yes, we cannot guarantee that people can come freely and without being stripped of their basic rights. Of course, under U.S. law, constitutional law, non-U.S. citizens have less rights protections at the border. That is known, and I'm not giving you any news here. But the matter of the fact is that the current administration has exacerbated the situation for particularly non-citizens and particularly migrant communities. People are living here with permanent legal residency have been threatened with deportation and detention. And we as the ACLU and our partners have launched legal challenge against those kind of practices because they take us back decades ago during democratism when you are cracking down on people's speech. It's particularly the kind of speech that the United States and the administration disfavors. That's why I'm concerned about major soccer players who has expressed views on certain causes, such as the Palestinian rights, would be denied entry or being detained or being subject to retaliation by the administration. This is the kind of thing that will really make this World Cup seem completely out of step with any basic human rights and international standards of decency and human dignity.
And I have a request from online to repeat the name of the person and the question, and that was Adam Crafton asking, are we delusional to think that any progress can be made on human rights? So, Martin.
Yeah, it's Martin Zeeland for the Times in England. There have been a couple of occasions where Donald Trump has threatened to move World Cup matches from his assistants. Just wondering if anyone thinks that is a part of what you're talking about in terms of, is this a response to people protesting against his policies?
So, who would like to take that one? I'm happy to, but maybe just to start, human rights, the rule of law, and international systems, which FIFA is signed up to, the whole point of it is predictability, reliability, and one thing that is not allowed is retaliation. So you are not allowed to retaliate against someone whose opinions you don't like. You're not allowed to keep journalists whose writings you don't like out of the United States for the World Cup. And you are not allowed to move host cities at a whim. And I think this is what international systems are about. It's a bad practice. It's unprofessional. But it's also antithetical to the whole concept of a reliable system. And I would add that FIFA is also to blame here. FIFA awarded the World Cup to Saudi Arabia without doing a proper human rights risk assessment, with doing a joke human rights assessment that found that there was a medium risk of human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia, which does not comport with international human rights reporting. So I think FIFA is also to blame for not upholding international standards and systems and awarding its own flagship tournament without the underpinning of proper human rights assessments when they know very well they must do it. Other thoughts?
Yeah, somehow being diplomatic has a pejorative connotation this morning. So at the risk of sounding like I'm being too diplomatic, I just want to say that to the earlier question really quickly about this administration, I think that is, my response was also, I think, a reflection of the fact that this is a question, I think, specifically for the White House Task Force on for 2026 and what they are doing actively, because they are also the interagency task force that has been completely silent on their plans for human rights and labor rights issues. On host city committees, I think that's a really interesting question. It is, I think you can read the temperature really well about how host cities will or will not respond to pressures from both federal and state governments by the action plans that they will release, hopefully by early next February. But I also think this is a question for FIFA. FIFA, I think it's very well known, has not resourced the host city committees in financial ways, or provided them with any financial means to actually execute the human rights action plans. So there's no funding, there is no kind of meaningful staff. So this is sort of the Wild West for actually human rights for a lot of host cities, in addition to a lot of political challenges that they're facing from both the federal government but also across state governments.
So I wanted to go now back to questions from online. And Jana Olivio from Finland's media Ital Sanomat asks, are there any specific countries that have qualified, for example, Iran, Uzbekistan, Haiti, or others, that you are concerned might not have supporters allowed to travel to the U.S. at all for the World Cup? And I'll go to Rachel Causey from the Sport and Rights Alliance for that answer.
Yes, thank you, Minky, and thank you for the question. We are concerned that supporters from Iran, Haiti, and other countries will not be able to come to the World Cup. We've worked very closely with the Open Stadiums movement in Iran, where women have been fighting for the right to attend their own football matches in country for decades. And now the World Cup in the U.S., which should be a beacon of freedom, is also now going to prevent those same fans from being able to attend matches. So we're very concerned, and we're calling on FIFA to work with the administration to ensure that supporters are able to attend the matches, and that this truly is a World Cup for the world. You cannot have the World Cup while leaving out most of it. Thank you.
So we want to go back to questions in the room. Yes.
To what extent have your organizations communicated with FIFA about this inaugural Peace Prize, and what commitments would you like to see to feel confident that it's not just PR stuff?
So that's Bill McCarthy from AFP asking about communication that civil society may have had with FIFA. And just a word about the FIFA Peace Prize, which is apparently modeled on the Nobel Peace Prize, which was not won by Donald Trump earlier this year. Human Rights Watch wrote to FIFA asking specifically what was the process, what are the criteria for selection, who are the nominees, and who are the judges. And Human Rights, that letter in the full form is linked from our statement today. We did not have an answer to that, which you could infer that there is no process, there are no other nominees, there was no judging, and of course the FIFA it was news to the FIFA Council, the governing body. So I really think that is a question for Gianni Infantino. And I wanted to turn over to him.
Yeah, I would just say briefly, look, it's kind of insult to the intelligence of a lot of fans and people, supporters, and people who are watching the World Cup when you were all of a sudden coming up with this prize that, as Nikki said, had no basis or very, very little transparency around it. The perception and the impression that you get, and I think that's really what at least as the ACLU see it, as this is, FIFA is dragging itself into becoming part of a public relations tool, as I said, to normalize an increasingly authoritarian U.S. government. That is a real concern. We're very troubled about that. So any actions by the president of FIFA or any officials of FIFA in the preparations for the World Cup has to be very carefully considered because of the way that they will be perceived and had an impact on real lives of people.
I would add one other thing. Gianni Infantino has said that this FIFA Peace Prize represents 5 billion fans of football around the world. I think it's really, the Dignity 2026 and the Sport and Rights Alliance have two of the major fan organizations. I think it is a very good question to ask, really, how were the 5 billion fans of football consulted? What was the polling? How were their opinions taken into account? So I think if you say a prize is on behalf of 5 billion people, then you actually have a responsibility to say, how did you consult those fans? What was your process? So we look forward to hearing what the process to consult the 5 billion fans of football was by Gianni Infantino. So another question in the room, and we're going to go until 11 o'clock. This was advertised as 90 minutes, and if there are questions we can't get to online, I also would like to say that we are available to answer those individually, either in writing or with interviews. Yes? Halvor Eklund from NOS asks about the choice of venue.
off, and this is not about the FIFA rules per se, but it goes back to the tournament itself being politicized and used as a PR tool for the current administration. As you know, the Kennedy Center has been taken over by the White House in a way that has been unprecedented. And in many ways, for civil society in the United States, folks said that we were going to not partake in activations at the Kennedy Center simply because it's being used as a tool by the White House for a self-appointed, if you will, king. And so you hear this notion of authoritarianism and fascism, and it actually is something that's playing itself out in the context even of the World Cup. If it's about the players, the fans, and community, then how can one person say we're going to shift where the draw is going to happen and place it in a location that benefits me politically? That's literally what we're seeing happen before our eyes. And so in many ways, the optics actually speaks to the undercurrent of what we're all lifting up, which is this is about the rule of law. It's about putting fans first. It's about putting communities first. And what we see, even with the draw being shifted to the Kennedy Center, it's another sort of line in the sand of a self-appointed king, if you will, saying, this is my playground, and I'm going to use this sporting match to really glorify myself and who I am as a leader, which is the antithesis of why we're here in the first place.
I would just add one additional comment, which is that this is part of a pattern of defunding art institutions, science institutions, research, and really take back the country in terms of so it's not just about what's happened in the Kennedy Center. You know, there's a lot of concerns that we have about the Trump administration interfering in the independence of many institutions, including the academia, including the higher education system, and the attacks on academic freedom, which is something that's been ongoing. And we've raised alarm and concerns, including in some of the context of litigation and other advocacy with other sister organizations. So we do have concerns about when you are trying to use, as my friend and colleague Jamal said, we're trying to weaponize and trying to use the venues based on ideological reasons rather than ensuring that those kinds of places are open to all, are really places where people can feel that they belong and they're not under a particular political tag or particular political affiliation. And only when, if you are close to the administration of the political party, then you will be able to be welcomed. I think what we care about is that have a country that people will be feeling all welcomed, a feeling that they have equal protection under the law, and there's not a country that belongs to only to a particular people who belong to a particular party or belong to a particular or voted to a particular president. And so that is, I think, what is at stake here. And turning the FIFA and the World Cup into some sort of another way of polarizing the country is really concerning to us.
Yes, football should unite, not polarize. A last question in the room, and then we have one more online. Any last question in the room? Yes.
Condemn for AFP as well. In which extent can have the ice raids an impact on during the World Cup? And can Trump also send the National Guard in some cities like he's done before with LA?
Yeah. So we'll go to Daniel.
Sure. Thank you.
Sorry. The question was about risks of ice raids from the AFP.
Sure. I think at this point, and as we have seen progressively in the past weeks, we think that it could be high probability. I mean, we started with raids happening in specific parts of the country. We started in LA, then it's happened here in Washington, D.C., and have been expanded to different parts of the country. We saw the horrific raids happening in Chicago, for example. We saw that almost militarized raid in a apartment complex where Blackhawks came on top of buildings, and federal agents were dropped there. Toddlers were tied hands outside of their buildings. So we're seeing all these different patterns that bring, of course, a worrisome perspective of what could be done afterwards. We are hearing today right now, for example, with the report that was headed by our sister organization, Human Rights Watch, on what is happening on these detentions in this context. So although we have heard reassurances by FIFA and in public statements that this will not happen. We cannot be confident of the work of the administration. It has been on several occasions as well in the Oval Office, in other type of statements where the president has said, well, once we have the visa and you decide to stay, you're gonna be Secretary No One's problem now. So there is this instant speech of belittling international fans, of putting down anyone who wants to attend these games and these events. So it's a very high probability as well of the use of the National Guard. We have seen an uptick in militarization, and we think that this could be amplified more, and that's what we have been saying. The World Cup security cannot be used as an excuse of heightening up the militarization in different parts of the country.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I just want to add, we are concerned about militarization of law enforcement now, tomorrow, before the World Cup, during the World Cup, and after the World Cup, right? And of course, now we focus on the World Cup because it's such a big event that has likelihood that this will make things worse for people in this country to feel safe, particularly immigrant communities. Well, one other thing I want to add, this administration is ramping up its immigration enforcement. For those of you who don't know, not familiar with the budget that was adopted by the U.S. Congress just a few months ago, we're talking about $170 billion in funding for immigration enforcement, including $45 billion specifically for ICE detention. Where is that money going to go? This is going to be going to these operations that we're seeing on a daily being expanded. Not only that, our concern is that military bases are being used in order to host, and they're already being holding migrants and immigrant detainees there before they're being sent and transferred illegally and many times abroad. So we are very concerned about militarization of law enforcement, very concerned about militarization, bringing the military into our cities and into our communities, and turning military bases, which really has reminiscence of the horrific legacy of the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. And that is something that I think we need to be very, very, this is an issue that has made the country split the country in a way that decades later, President Reagan had to apologize for the thousands and thousands of Japanese Americans who have been detained in internment camps. We do not want to see this happening in this country. There's already been chapters like this. So FIFA had a role to play in sending a clear message and take a real commitment and assurances that be made that those things are not going to be happening during FIFA. But we want them to be stopping tomorrow, today and tomorrow, not to wait until next summer.
I think one of the challenges for stakeholders over the last few years, and particularly now as we're getting closer and closer to the tournament next year, is the fact that FIFA and other organizers have not been as explicit and transparent as they should have been all along about what their plans are. So we need FIFA and host cities and other entities to make clear whether or not ICE and National Guard and other federal law enforcement will be at the stadiums. In addition to what Jamil has said, we know that recently, as many of you have also reported, U.S. government has passed $625 million in federal funding for security apparatuses for the host cities. We don't know how that money will be used. I don't know when we will know how that money will be used. We also don't know what the security apparatus or footprint looks like from FIFA within stadiums, at fan festivals, and other tournament areas. I think we do have some indication, of course, this isn't just kind of hypothetical of what ICE will look like at stadiums. The Club World Cup this summer, which was held across many of the same host cities, ICE was seen at stadiums. And I will just note that in kind of the readout or the postmortem on the Club World Cup on human rights issues and through FIFA's grievance mechanisms, without naming the specific numbers, we do know that federal enforcement immigration was one of the biggest concerns. Overwhelmingly, almost a third of the complaints that FIFA received in its grievance mechanism portals was around federal policies or enforcement, i.e. immigration. Other issues that came up are extreme heat, accessibility, discrimination, workers' rights, safeguarding, harassment, freedom of speech, excessive use of force, and freedom of religion. So again, I think with many things, this is not speculative We know that ICE at this rate will be at stadiums, and we need more clarity from the FIFA, about what they plan to do about it.
Thanks very much. So, and just one point about this, all human rights are interconnected. So the situation in Los Angeles, for example, where there were ICE raids in communities, and then there were peaceful protests against the ICE raids that turned violent with the militarization. So all of these human rights issues are related, and you can see how there would be a perfect storm about ICE actions at a tournament which is supposed to be about uplifting humanity, but turns out to be about separating families, possibly forever. So I'm going to take one last question, and then I'm going to ask every one of our panelists to respond to this, because I think it's a question that is a subtext of what we've been talking about today. And it is a question from Claire Richardson from BBC News. This week, U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has recommended a full travel ban for a list of additional countries yet to be announced. We talked about there was a dozen in the executive order from last June, and a total of 19 countries are affected in some way from the June executive order. This question is, how do you expect this could affect travel for teams and fans to the United States? So I'm going to start with Rachel and also ask that the answer to that question from our experts wraps up your final thoughts.
Thank you so much. Yes, we have seen that news and are very concerned that Haiti, Iran, and then now there might be many more teams and cohorts of supporters that are now not able to, or at least under fear of not being able to come to the U.S. I think some of the executive orders in the past have included carve-outs for players and other officials with the teams, but we are calling for more transparency on that. We need really clear guidelines about who is able to come to the World Cup, and we need FIFA to use its leverage to ensure, once again, that this is a World Cup for the world. I think just to wrap up, there was a question earlier about what gives us hope. Why are we still calling on FIFA to do things? And it is because the FIFA does listen. We might be known for criticizing FIFA a lot, but there are wonderful things that FIFA has done, including just recently allowing Afghan women's national team football players the right to play again as the Afghan women's refugee team. We're still fighting for recognition for the full team, but it shows that FIFA does listen, that FIFA understands when it's wrong and is willing to make changes. And so we are going to keep pushing as long as we have breath for that. And then finally, the fans. FIFA is not President Infantino. It is not one person. It is not 5 people. It is the billions of fans around the world who have immense power and care about their sport not being used for authoritarian means. So that is, thank you very much.
So Clayton, maybe the travel ban and how it could affect these travel bans, and then an unspecified future list of countries that could take us to 50.
Yeah, well, there was a question earlier about the close relationship between FIFA and the presidential administration right now, and in this instance, FIFA needs to use that close relationship to secure concrete commitments of a transparent and accessible process for journalists to be able to come to this country legally to cover the World Cup before, during, and after the tournament. And I also want to be clear, this can't be limited to just FIFA-accredited journalists or to Federation-accredited journalists or to journalists who are from countries that have qualified for the World Cup. This is the world's tournament, even though a small handful of countries are participating. The whole world is watching. The whole world wants to come. The whole world wants to watch it. Thank you. And journalists from all over the world have the right to come to the United States to cover this story of global significance.
And Daniel, a question.
Thank you. I think that we have made it abundantly clear that this is a world event. This is a world event that encompasses the most popular sport in the world. I grew up in Latin America. I grew up in Ecuador, so I know what it means to feel when your team qualifies for the first time or qualifies after a long time. Like that feeling that carries with you. It also creates national identity, especially in countries that have suffered a lot. you coalesce around football. Football is really what brings you together. So these type of actions really does diminish the purpose of the tournament, does diminish the purpose of the sport, does diminish what is intended to do, which is to unite. We tend to be sometimes kind of idealize these type of events, but this is actually what it's meant to happen. This is actually what it meant to be. And in spaces, and especially in a time where we see an uptick in authoritarian practices from all over the world, I think it's important to keep these spaces where people can be heard, where people can actually bring forward their concerns and their speech towards the world in general. For example, as Jamal said before, the Palestinian cause has been something that has really been put in the forefront by football fans. They have been the ones that have been really trying to put this message forward. So I think that we need to keep on pushing. This is something that is meant for the people and by the people, and I think fans will ultimately either punish or we ultimately reward what will be the outcome of this game and this tournament. Thank you.
So let's start with Jamal and finish with Jennifer. So the question is, are travel bans good for the World Cup?
Unapologetically, no. Let's be clear that travel bans or any bans in this country are usually used as a political tool. If we were to go back to the first Trump administration, there was the Muslim ban. And so you think about these travel bans as being used to demonize communities. And so if you're targeting a country like Haiti, you're not just talking about the communities in Haiti, you're also talking about folks in the United States who have temporary protected status, which has been stripped away. You're talking about taxpayers who live in the United States who want to actually participate in our democracy. So this notion of a travel ban is a smokescreen for politicization of an authoritarian regime. And so in many ways, what we would say as the NAACP is that the focus has to go back to people and communities, putting people before profits, making sure that what happens before, during, and after the games is all about investing in communities. You're talking about 5 billion plus fans around the globe and millions of fans here inside of the U.S. borders. If we don't invest in those communities, making sure that they're safe, making sure that the working people are safe, making sure that the standards are elevated, then we're doing the wrong things. And as I started and had said earlier, we're not talking about the kings that live here in Washington, D.C. We're talking about the kings on the field. And so we want to make sure that the sport is being amplified in a way that connects the dots. And so as we continue to fight forward and push forward, I'm reminiscing, I like that question around why do we keep doing this? We won't stop until we win. And what winning looks like is making sure that every community is included and every community is made whole.
Thank you. Neil,
And very quickly, because I know we're wrapping up, ACLU believes that we have to have a system that is fair and humane, a fair system of treating people and humane treatment of all people. And that applies to situations where executive branch exceeds and misuses its and abuses its powers in order to advance particular political agenda. We think that people should be no collective punishment. There should not be overbroad, and any racial or religious animus is something that is rejected by the U.S. Constitution. And therefore, we'll see the details of what kind of bans they'll come up with. ACLU, as always, will analyze this, and we will look into exploring all aspects or all possible measures that we can take, including litigation, as we did in the past. But for now, I think it's really important to focus on what is happening. There's already harm and damage made by the executive orders that have already been issued and other presidential memorandums that are issued against people traveling or people who are in this country. And I think, again, I want to emphasize that we really need to make sure that there are changes and movement, and FIFA can make that difference by leveraging its influence, whether it's the closest relationship between the president of FIFA and the President Trump, or because of the leverage that they have financially. People will not be coming to the United States. That's a big loss for the United States. And we don't have the numbers. I'm sure somebody will do the numbers, and we're not experts in that. But I feel like, finally, on a personal note, as Daniel said, I'm a Palestinian American. And as a Palestinian American, I would want to see also a Palestinian be able to travel who are living here or be able to travel to the United States to watch the games. The fact that there is already decisions made as a matter of a collective punishment against Palestinians who are holding Palestinian passport issued by the Palestinian Authority is something that at least personally troubling. I'm not here speaking as a ACLU, but rather just giving you a sense of how people in this country, we are a community of people who come from all over the world. So taking people out, banning people based on religion, nationality, or race, or sexual orientation for other matter, or political views, is something that we should not endorse, should not accept in this country. And that's why I think we're going to be fighting for a fair and humane system of immigration that treats everyone based on the merit rather than weaponizing it for ideological reasons.
I'll try to be quick. So I think on the ban, I think it's just to be clear, and I think I speak for many of us, if not all of us up here, is that we want visitors to come. We want the World Cup to go off next year without a hitch. I think many of us, as you can see, are great fans of football and of the sport, and so we want to see it go swimmingly. But this should not be at the expense of some of our most vulnerable residents, be they immigrants, the unhoused, workers, children, and so forth. In terms of the hope question, I mean, frankly, I don't know that we have a choice. Because 2026 next year, for many of our host cities in the United States, is going to be one of many coming up. Take LA, for example. They're hosting the Super Bowl the year after the World Cup, and then the LA Olympics in 2028. So for us, the FIFA World Cup next year will be a blueprint not just for future tournaments across the globe, including in 2030 and 2034, but it's a blueprint for how mega sporting event is achieved in this country, and so that we can leave a positive legacy in those host cities as we asked for in 2018 when we had won the bid.
So, mercifully, the press conference is coming to an end. I want to sum up by thanking our partners, the Sport and Rights Alliance, Dignity 2026, and all of you. You actually are, this is your workplace, and we defend your right to come here without harassment and abuse, to not have to download the contents of your phone, or to worry about being detained for something you wrote. I wanted to say that this is intended as a wake-up call for FIFA. As Jennifer indicated, we have been working with FIFA, with their excellent human rights team, with many partners inside FIFA. It's not a monolithic organization, and there are many people who understand very well the responsibilities that FIFA has to uphold human rights, to uphold the rule of law, and not to create an event that is a dragnet for immigration enforcement. That is a very important point. So I wanted to end by saying there is no World Cup where players have in the workplace faced LGBT discrimination, harassment, racism, or abuse. There should not be a World Cup where workers or children are exploited for their labor. There should not be a World Cup where fans face being banned, or worse, arrested and deported if they are here in the United States. So that's I think we have two visions. You've heard two visions of the World Cup today. One that uplifts the rights of workers, of fans, of players, of journalists, and of communities, and one that actually abuses the rights of these essential stakeholders for the World Cup. This will not be the last time you hear from Dignity 2026 and from the Sporting Rights Alliance. We hope to be resource reporting on things that are relevant for the World Cup coming forward. And next year we will be having reports on the human rights situation in Canada and in Mexico. But because the World Cup draw is taking place on Friday, because the so-called FIFA Peace Prize will be awarded on Friday, we felt it was really important to give a counterpoint about where the situation stands right now, today in the United States. Thank you for coming, thank you for listening, and thank you for your great questions. We have available electronically and online the statement from all of the groups that are participating, and everyone here is available for interviews following. Thanks very much. Thank you for staying past the beginning of the Giuliani press conference. Words we thought we weren't going to
Nice to meet you in person.
Somebody-
Hi. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Yeah.